Welcome, brave listeners, to Wilhelm Presents Frightening Tales. I'm your host, Wilhelm. Tune in each week where I entertain my listeners with another dark and creepy tale of the paranormal, donated by authors from all over our world. If you are an author of some paranormal fiction and would like to share a story with my listeners, submit one at frighteningtales.com. And while you're there, tune in for more than 100 episodes of previous content. Today's episode is written by Ananth Ram, the mysterious author of Unknown Parts. Ananth writes a number of creepypastas and has stories available on Amazon. If you'd like to learn more about Ananth, look for links in the show notes. But for now, here's his tale, The Waltz at the Gas Station. When we arrived at the Renfield residence, the first thing I noticed was that the front door was left half open. This was supposed to be my first visit to their home. I could see that there was no car parked out front, but the driveway still bore visible tire marks. The garden around the house also showed mild signs of neglect, with overgrown bushes, a few scattered weeds, and grass that had become somewhat unruly. It was hard to tell whether this was a sign of unexpected abandonment or simply lazy upkeep. My husband, Richard, gently knocked on the door, his fingers idly brushing the handle of his gun at his side, just in case. "Mr. and Mrs. Renfield," he shouted, his voice echoing across the front patio. I stood right behind him, with our 6-year-old son peeking out from behind me. There was no response. After almost a minute of waiting, my husband decided to go in and take a look. "Stay here," he said, as he unholstered his weapon and stepped inside. When he pushed the door wide open, I immediately caught a glimpse of the living room. It appeared as though the Renfields had left in a hurry, leaving most of their belongings strewn about. The back screen door, left ajar, slowly creaked open and shut with the breeze. "Mr. Renfield?" he called out again, as he surveyed the room. "This is Sheriff Parkins. Is anyone home?" Richard next instinctively pointed his gun at the ceiling, when he heard footsteps emanate from the upper floor. The sound seemed to move away and gradually fade as it eventually led towards the staircase across the living room. "Whoever you are, be careful now," he cautioned loudly. "Please make your way down the stairs, slowly and calmly." I honestly didn't know what to expect, as I held on to my son Alex tightly near the doorway. Maybe it was one of the Renfields themselves coming down the stairs, or perhaps a burglar who had slipped in through the open door, or even a homeless person seeking shelter for the night. But instead, a large German shepherd appeared, his eyes locked on Richard as he descended the stairs. He looked menacing with each step he took, his fur bristled, muscles coiled, as though preparing for a confrontation. "Easy there, boy," Richard said in a low, soothing voice, his weapon still pointed at the animal. "I'm not here to hurt anyone, buddy. Let's keep things calm. All right. He took a cautious step back as the dog reached the foot of the stairs, trying to signal that he meant no harm. My husband glanced briefly at me and Alex, then refocused on the dog, careful not to make any sudden moves. The German Shepherd barked twice, baring his teeth, his gaze locked on Richard as it took a tentative step forward, almost expecting him to retreat further in response. But Richard didn't budge this time, and the dog's stance grew more aggressive. A deep growl rumbled in his throat as he bared his teeth even further, taking another deliberate step forward, poised to attack at any moment. In an instant, my 6-year-old suddenly broke free from my grip and rushed into the house. "Alex!" I yelled after him, panic surging through my chest. I'm not sure what exactly happened next, but the dog's stance immediately relaxed. He sat on his hind legs with his tail swaying slightly as he looked at Alex. Before either of us could react, Alex placed his hand on the dog's head. "You must be Kripke. Nice to finally meet you," he said, patting the dog gently. The German Shepherd's ears twitched, but he remained seated, his tail wagging more vigorously as Alex stroked his fur. My heart raced, unsure what was happening, but the tension in the air had shifted entirely. Richard heaved a sigh of relief and cautiously lowered his weapon, looking equally confused. Before we had any time to process the situation, Kripke suddenly bolted up the stairs, prompting Alex to chase after him, with Richard and me quickly following suit. He led us straight to the last room on the upper floor and stopped next to a closet. It was clear the room belonged to a little girl with pink-colored walls and a small bed dressed in fairy-patterned linens. Yet it had an air of neglect. Unwashed plates and bowls of cereal lay scattered across the floor, adding to the sense of disorder. Richard, with Alex now by his side, silently motioned for him to stay back. Slowly, he opened the closet door, and I immediately recognized Lily. She was sitting inside, crouched on her knees, her index and middle finger in her mouth, and her eyes wide with nervousness. Her gaze darted between the three of us as she continued to suck on her fingers, looking vulnerable. Finding her in such a state, the reality hit me. She had been abandoned by her own family. The thought of her enduring such isolation made my heart ache with sadness. The Renfield family had moved to our town only 6 months ago. I first met them during Mass, at church, where they appeared to be a typical, if somewhat private, couple who mostly kept to themselves. Their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was in the same class as my son. The two kids quickly became friends, and when Lily missed 3 days of school in a row, Alex grew concerned. He kept insisting that we check on her family at their home. Richard had just returned from a grueling overnight sting operation with the city police and was already looking exhausted and worn out. Despite his fatigue, he agreed to come with us to check on the Renfields on our way to school. But what happened to the girl's parents? I wondered silently as my thoughts returned to the present. Why did they leave her alone in this house, with no one to care for her? Meanwhile, Alex knelt in front of Lily and gave her a gentle hug, while Kripke calmly stayed by their side, his tail wagging softly. Richard and I helped Lily climb out of the closet and onto the bed. She continued to suck on her fingers, a clear sign of her distress. I gently took her hand away and wiped it with a towel. Her pajamas, which hadn't been changed in several days, looked crumpled and soiled with food stains. Richard then left to check the room across the hall that belonged to the parents. When he returned, his expression revealed that it had been completely cleared out. I couldn't help but wonder again why the Renfields would suddenly abandon their only child. With no immediate answers available, I quickly packed a bag with some of Lily's clothes and toys from her room and escorted the kids and Kripke back downstairs to get to our car. We decided it was best to let Alex skip school for a couple of days so that Lily felt comfortable while she stayed in her home. When we finally arrived at our residence, I saw tears trickling down Lily's face. In this new and unfamiliar environment, it seemed to dawn on her that things were changing faster than she could process. She was already starting to miss the comfort of her own home. Lily slowly stepped out of the car, holding Kripke's leash, while Alex took her other hand and gently led her inside the house. When I stepped into the living room, a foul smell immediately hit me, wafting from the kitchen. I silently gestured for Alex to take Lily to the spare room at the end of the hall. Richard and I then cautiously made our way to the kitchen to investigate the strange odor. There, on the kitchen counter, we found a gutted pigeon, left for dead. Next to it, a family photo of me, Richard, and Alex lay flat, with a single bullet placed ominously on top. I saw the color immediately drain from Richard's face. He had been working with the FBI to take down a regional drug cartel, and just hours earlier they had raided their base. While they seized millions in drugs and arrested over a dozen people, a few key members, including the ringleader, had evaded capture. Richard assured me that he would deploy deputies around the house and that they would also soon catch the ones on the run. We then quickly cleaned the kitchen to ensure the kids didn't walk in on the disturbing scene. A few minutes later, I helped Lily change out of her old clothes and gave her a quick bath, while my husband tended to Kripke, ensuring he was well fed and comfortable. We did our best to make Lily feel at home, but it was clear she was missing her parents. She handed her dad's number to Richard, asking him to call it and contact her father, her eyes all the while brimming with hope. Somehow, she felt with calling him, the outcome would be different. However, when the number proved unreachable, Lily simply sat in a corner with Kripke and refused to eat. No amount of cajoling by me or Richard seemed to make a difference. Even Alex tried to help by bringing her a plate of food, but it remained untouched. Fortunately, things started to look up a couple of hours later, when Alex pulled out a wooden top from his pocket and dangled it in front of Lily to grab her attention. With careful precision, he wound the string tightly around the grooved, pear-shaped toy, then yanked it sharply in one fluid motion. The top bobbed in the air for a moment before landing on its metallic tip, spinning smoothly on the ground. The trick worked. Lily's eyes followed the top as it danced in graceful arcs, looping and wobbling across the floor in mesmerizing circles. But Alex was not done yet. He expertly looped the string around the spinning metallic tip and yanked at it again, with greater force. The top bobbed in the air once again, only to land on the palm of his hand this time, and continued to spin unobstructed. Smiling, he walked over to Lily and gestured for her to hold out her hand. She hesitated, looking unsure at first, but eventually complied, and Alex deftly transferred the spinning top to her waiting palm. Lily almost broke into a smile as the rotating top tickled her skin. Almost, but the distraction helped her to snap out of her melancholy when I brought 2 large bowls of soup for Alex and her a few minutes later. She accepted without a word. I quietly watched as the 2 children ate their meal in silence. Once Richard got back to the office, he issued a bolo for Lily's parents and began searching for any living relatives who might be willing to take her in. During his investigation, he discovered that both Mr. and Mrs. Renfield had grown up as orphans in the same orphanage before eventually marrying each other. They had adopted Lily from the church when she was just 1 year old, and she had been under their care ever since. Armed with this information, my husband realized that without any immediate relatives to contact, he had no choice but to involve child services. The case officer informed him that due to a backlog of cases in neighboring regions, it would take a couple of days before a representative could come to our town. In the meantime, we decided to let Lily stay with us until the authorities could take over. On one hand, Lily was showing signs of improvement as she started to relax around us, especially with Alex's constant efforts to make her feel comfortable. Richard, on the other hand, was another matter. He still hadn't fully recovered from the shock of the morning's events. Being in a small town with limited manpower, I knew he had extra reasons to worry about our safety. But it didn't help that he kept tossing and turning in bed, conducting perimeter checks around the house every hour throughout the night. The following day, which happened to be a Sunday, we all stayed in. As the 4 of us sat in the living room, the oppressive silence finally got to me. I stood up from the couch and planted myself in front of Richard. "Honey, I've been telling you for a long time that I want you to join me for ballroom dancing. You've postponed it for years, but today we're going to change that." I picked up the remote and turned on a rerun of Dancing with the Stars. "Come on, it's now or never," I said, extending my hand as I watched my husband sit there looking absolutely stupefied. "Are you really going to let your wife feel embarrassed in front of the kids?" I added, raising an eyebrow at him. With a sigh, Richard finally stood up and took my hand, and we began to dance, spinning in awkward circles around the living room. A moment later, Alex joined in, taking Lily's hand and putting on a little performance of their own. It didn't take long for me to realize that the men in the Parkin household are terrible dancers with 2 left feet. But for the first time, I saw Lily laugh out loud as Alex fumbled and tripped through the simplest of steps. Even Kripke got in on the fun, joyfully dancing solo, spinning in clockwise and counterclockwise maneuvers whenever he got the chance. This was followed by a sumptuous lunch where Richard and I took charge in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and stirring pots. The children also eagerly joined in, with Alex carefully peeling carrots while Lily arranged various spices and ingredients on the counter. By the time we sat down to eat, a sense of togetherness wrapped around us like a warm blanket. When Monday finally arrived, it was time to take Lily to meet her case officer, and the meeting was set up in Richard's office. I packed some sandwiches for her, feeling a mix of emotions in my heart, even though she had only been with us for a couple of days. As I handed the sandwiches to Lily, I did my best to allay her fears, reassuring her that she was in good hands and that everything would turn out all right. She nodded silently and gently wrapped her arms around my legs in gratitude. We all then got in the car as Richard started for the office. He stopped en route at the gas station to fill up the tank. I stepped out to get a bottle of water from the nearby store, and Alex ran after me, eager to buy a send-off present for Lily. Richard mentioned that he would park the car at the edge of the gas station near the exit so he could check the air pressure too. He went ahead and parked it just ahead of the storekeeper's pickup. As I entered the store, I noticed an old Lincoln pull up and take the spot Richard had just vacated. The gift selection was limited, but a cute panda stuffed animal caught Alex's eye, and he immediately reached for it. As we approached the counter, I noticed a man of medium height and stocky build casually walk into the store. He looked to be in his early 50s and was dressed in a suit with a cap pulled low over his face. The man grabbed a pack of gum from a nearby stand and placed it on the counter. When the storekeeper mentioned the price, the man nodded as if reaching for his wallet. But instead he pulled out a pistol and without hesitation shot the storekeeper point blank in the face. He then turned to me, his expression eerily calm. "Good morning, Mrs. Parkins. How do you do?" he asked, breaking into a smile. "I'm Steve, your friendly neighborhood drug dealer. Glad we could finally meet." As I stood paralyzed in shock, my body instinctively moved to shield my son. But Steve was quicker. He yanked the collar of Alex's shirt, pulled him close, and aimed the pistol at his head. "Don't try and be a hero today, Mrs. Parkins," he said, his voice icy cold. "Your husband already tried that, and you see where that got him." My eyes automatically gravitated towards our car parked at the edge of the gas station, where I saw Richard frantically alight and run towards the store with a gun in his hand. I watched in agonizing detail as Richard's expression shifted from resolve to complete horror upon realizing that we were being held hostage, causing him to stop just short of the store's entrance. To make matters worse, the two individuals from the Lincoln parked near the gas pump also emerged from their vehicle and took up positions behind Richard. They were unmistakably part of Steve's crew. One of them snatched the gun from Richard's hand and tucked it into the small of his back, while the others kept his firearm trained on him. Steve then escorted me and Alex out of the store, while his sidekick kept a watchful eye on Richard. "Get on your knees," Steve ordered, leveling his weapon at us as we approached one of the fuel pumps. "Isn't this how you had us surrender when you raided my place?" he taunted Richard, glancing over at him as he mockingly clasped his hands behind his head. Alex and I knelt just inches apart with one of Steve's henchmen looming behind us. Richard stood 10 feet away, his back to the store with another gunman aiming at him, while Steve remained near the other pump, casting glances between us and Richard. In the middle of all this chaos, I also worried about Lily. The last thing I wanted was for her to be dragged into this nightmare. The dealers so far seemed completely unaware of her or Kripke. Their attention was focused solely on Richard and us, and I prayed they wouldn't think to check the car. Thinking about Kripke, I also immediately worried over how Lily would be able to control him amidst all this commotion. I stole a quick glance at our car, and from a distance it did look empty. But for those who knew, it was impossible not to miss Lily's forehead peeking up from above the back seat, her eyes fully focused on the event unfolding in front of her. Kripke was nowhere in sight beside her. My heart pounded away in my chest when I spotted him crouched beneath the storekeeper's pickup truck. He had already sneaked out of our car and was silently lying in wait. His body was coiled tight and his expression was fierce, just as it had been when I first met him. He looked poised and ready for a fight. My thoughts were interrupted suddenly when I heard my husband's voice break through the silence. "This is between you and me, Steve. They have nothing to do with this. It's me you want. Release them and let's sort this out like we need to." Richard finally spoke, trying to stay calm, despite the gravity of the situation. Steve nodded with exaggerated silence and snapped his fingers at one of his crew members, who went by the name Softy. Softy walked over to the old Lincoln, pulled a baseball bat from the back seat and delivered a crushing blow to Richard's leg, sending him crashing to the ground in agony. Alex and I watched in horror as he writhed in pain. Softy then held the bat horizontally, clamping it down on Richard's throat from behind as he struggled to maintain his balance. "If only life was that simple, Sheriff Parkins," Steve said, pulling a cigar from his coat and slicing it with a cutter. "All you had to do was look the other way. We weren't even operating on your radar. We had, in fact, set up a base well beyond the confines of your town. But you had to dig around and notify the big boys anyway. Do you have any idea how unhappy that made my employers? How many millions of dollars in product have been lost because of you? Do you think our families are safe now, considering what has happened?" Steve's voice was laced with anger, echoing the frustration of his crew. "So, why should I let you or your family go, Sheriff Parkins?" Steve asked, his expression deadly serious. He then placed the unlit cigar in his mouth and walked over to where Alex and I stood. He removed the fuel nozzle from the gas pump next to us and began dousing us in gasoline. Richard struggled to push himself up, his eyes wild with panic as he saw the gasoline seep into our clothes. "Stop!" he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. Softy rammed the knob of the bat into his ribs, leaving him wheezing and doubled over in pain. "Oh, I'm afraid it's far too late for that, Sheriff," Steve said, lighting his cigar and taking a slow, deep drag. Smoke swirled around him as he continued. "When this place burns to the ground, your faces will make the headlines tomorrow." He twirled the cigar between his fingers, pacing deliberately around us, dangerously hovering over the gasoline-soaked ground. "Hopefully that will send the right message to the entire county, and maybe even help us regain favor with our bosses," he added, a twisted grin forming as he savored the moment. I suddenly felt a throbbing pain in my head. I couldn't tell if it was from the constant inhalation of fumes after being doused in gasoline, but it was a strange sensation. It felt like a small voice somewhere deep inside was trying to break free, as if it were asserting itself within my consciousness. So much so that it started to filter out all the noise around me as I watched Steve continue to address my husband, but I couldn't hear a word of what he said. And the voice in my head only grew louder and louder until I heard it finally utter my own name. Mrs. Parkins? Can you hear me, Mrs. Parkins? My eyes subconsciously drifted towards Lily, and she was looking right back at me. Before I could even answer yes to her, I somehow realized she already heard it, and she began speaking again. Mrs. Parkins, on the count of 3, I need you to grab Alex and drop to the ground. Are you with me? I felt my son silently tugging at my arm. His eyes locked on mine, focused and determined. He already knew what to do and was ready. My gaze shifted instinctively to my husband, Richard, who caught my eye for a fleeting moment, even while fighting against Softy's grip. He blinked at me just before another blow landed on him, and in that moment, I understood that Lily had managed to reach him too. And then I heard the countdown start in my own head. 1, 2. I grabbed Alex, and together we collapsed to the ground. As my body hit the asphalt, I watched Kripke bolt from beneath the truck, racing towards Softy. In that instant, Richard seized the bat pressing against his neck, yanked it down with all his strength. Softy suddenly staggered forward, his body arching over Richard as he briefly lost his balance. In a flash, Kripke leaped, his jaws locking around Softy's throat and tearing into it with savage force. Blood sprayed as chunks of flesh flew from Kripke's mouth, even before his feet touched the ground. Just as Softy was about to hit the ground with a thud, face first, Kripke launched himself into the air once again, this time aiming for the man positioned behind me. The next few seconds unfolded in a chaotic blur. I saw Richard lunge for the gun tucked in the small of Softy's back. Without thinking, I wrapped my body around Alex, trying to shield him as best I could. And I closed my eyes just as a barrage of gunshots erupted from all directions. When the gunfire finally subsided, I cracked my eyes open and looked around. Alex was fine and unhurt, and I silently advised him to remain motionless on the ground. The person behind me lay dead, shot in the chest. Turning my head, I saw Softy on the ground, his hand feebly trying to cover his mutilated neck as he gasped for air. A few feet away, Richard lay sprawled out, unresponsive, a small pool of blood slowly forming beneath him. Panic gripped me as I rushed over. He'd been shot in the gut, and I realized he had lost consciousness. A bullet had narrowly grazed his head. Looking up, I noticed a pistol lying a few feet away, but before I could react, Steve's voice cut through the air. "Don't even think about it. Back away right now, or I'll blow your brains out," he warned, his voice trembling as he waved the gun at me. His hand shook violently and blood dripped down his left shoulder from a large gunshot wound. He walked closer and kicked the gun away from my reach. I could not have used the firearm anyway, not when I have been doused in gasoline. But Steve was already busy trying to track Kripke, who I assumed had moved to the other end of the fueling lane, likely hiding behind the Lincoln. It was hard not to notice a small trail of blood curve around the fueling bay and lead all the way to the car on the other side. Steve first desperately tried to steady his trembling hand by gripping the gun in both hands, only to realize he was still holding a lit cigar, now mangled between his fingers and all the chaos. Frustrated, he flung it behind him where it landed on a dry patch of ground, safely away from the fuel pumps. Tightening his grip on the gun, he limped toward the other end of the fueling bay. He reappeared in front of the Lincoln, gun raised, carefully scanning the area for any sign of Kripke. He noticed the trail of blood, too. Just as he was about to stoop and peer under the car, Kripke lunged from beneath, causing Steve to stumble back and crash into the nearby pump. Despite the shock, he managed to hold on to his weapon, and as Kripke's jaws came dangerously close to his face, Steve fired 3 quick shots into the dog's body. When Kripke's lifeless body slowly crumpled to the floor, a loud guttural cry suddenly pierced through the air. A lump formed in my throat as I watched Lily in the back seat of the car, her small fists pounding helplessly at the headrest in front of her as she sobbed uncontrollably. Even Alex broke into tears, his gaze fixed on Kripke lying motionless on the asphalt. Steve, still reeling from the sudden attack, looked flabbergasted as he turned and noticed Lily for the first time. He flailed his weapon aimlessly in confusion, struggling to regain his footing. His legs wobbled again and he hit the ground hard when he saw Lily standing a mere 10 feet away from him. She had emerged from the car, her face contorted in a cold stare as she sucked on her fingers. In open-mouthed horror, I saw it hovering in the air behind Steve. The hose attached to the nozzle snaked around his torso like a python, causing him to jerk back and lose his grip on the weapon. The hose then yanked him with such force that his body slammed against the metallic column next to the pump, coiling upward to emerge through the open neck of his coat. It wrapped around his throat, pinning his head to the pole as he began to choke. Steve desperately tried to reach for his fallen gun, but it lay just out of his grasp. As the hose continued to tighten around his neck, the nozzle began to slowly point upwards, and then I saw gasoline erupt out of it like a fountain, drenching Steve completely from head to toe. Lily continued to watch, her head slightly tilted and fingers still in her mouth. At that very moment, I felt a voice go off in my head. "Please, help Mr. Parkins get to the car." I rushed to my husband, with Alex joining me as we tried to wake him. He was still fading in and out of consciousness, but was lucid enough to let us help him get him off the ground. As he wrapped his arms around me and Alex, we hurried to the car as fast as we could. Once I got him settled inside, Alex raced over to where Lily stood. He pulled a top from his pocket and began to string it right beside her, then yanked at the string as the top hit the ground and started to spin furiously. The small circles gradually grew bigger as the top continued to spin on its axis until it began to trace loops around the gas station, like a car on a NASCAR track. Steve watched in wide-eyed disbelief as the top defied the laws of physics, bouncing along the asphalt at will, indulging in a series of mini hops while skillfully avoiding the puddle of gasoline that had formed an island on both sides of the fuel pump. When the metallic tip eventually made contact with the gasoline, the liquid fuel splashed upwards, enveloping itself completely around the wooden surface. In that moment, time began to slow down as I watched the top spin, making its way towards the discarded cigar, brushing against the lid end and igniting into flames. Now ablaze, the top committed itself to one final lap around the gas station, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. "Alex, get to the car!" I yelled as I lifted Lily into my arms and raced towards the vehicle with all my strength. When I turned the ignition, I glanced back one final time, catching the look of sheer terror etched in Steve's eyes as he watched the fiery top spin directly towards him. I shifted gears and sped away, heading to the nearest hospital as the station became engulfed in flames, with Steve's anguished cries echoing behind us. It's been 3 weeks since the incident at the gas station, and Richard thankfully is en route to making a full recovery. He has also started the legal process of adopting Lily into our family, which I should say makes me happy. We can't hand her over to child services now, not after all that has happened. And I always wanted a daughter, and now I feel like the family is complete. Yet, I still find myself experiencing sleepless nights every once in a while, haunted by memories of that day. I've brought Richard up to speed about the events of that fateful encounter, but he does not have a true measure of Lily's ability like I do. He was unconscious and missed almost everything, and Alex is too young to truly understand, even though he witnessed it all. But those worries melt away whenever I look at Lily and see her smiling at me. Still, a lingering fear persists deep within me. Perhaps it'll go away with time. I know it will.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining me today. Please join me again next week for another frightening tale, or listen to one of more than 100 previous episodes. If you enjoyed your time here, please support my work. If you've been watching on YouTube, like the episode and subscribe to the channel. If you've been tuned in on Apple Podcast, please rate the channel as you see fit. And if you've been listening to the program on Spotify, I'd love to hear your comments. Most of all, share frightening tales with those around you and support today's authors however you can. Until next time, when I share with you another frightening tale, listen if you're brave enough.